All right, everyone, it was once said that when fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and waving a cross. And this was definitely true in the prior paradigm. Just as before that, basically, it was a different flag. It was, well, the Nazis are going to try to take us over, or then the commies. And then the idea out of the moral majority, we're talking especially 80s and 90s, I'd argue the 2000s for the most part as well, into the almost completely modern period. The moralism that we did see, like attempts to suppress ideology, to censor people, to persecute them in any way, they came from usually a religious backdrop. And what we would conceive of as a conservative or traditionalistic backdrop. That's the group of people that mainly lashed out at others. They had enormous power, especially in radio at the time, and at least at the beginning of that paradigm, television as well. All the late night sort of shockumentary stuff you saw in the 80s had a pretty conservative bent. When you're looking at like Wally George or even like Geraldo's stuff, it's certainly not coming out of far leftism. It doesn't come from that postmodern sort of aspect. There's cat hair everywhere as usual. What happened though? Around the end of the 2000s, early 2010s, because the political paradigm began flipping, the new moralists, they tend to be, they're still wrapped in a flag, but it's the pride flag. They're still waving a symbol around, but it's no longer the cross. It's basically, it's a coexist sign or a BLM pamphlet or something. And I don't say this because I'm opposed to the idea of gay rights or something. If you're gay or bi or whatever, you do you, if you want to live your lifestyle, you're cross-dressing, whatever, I don't care. But it's become corporatized in the same sense that the moral majority of yesteryear was corporatized. Here's how. There were definitely genuinely moralistic people like in the 80s and the 90s, genuinely religious individuals. But for every genuinely religious individual who was genuinely upset about homosexuals, weed smoking, Dungeons and Dragons, Iron Maiden, and all of the things that'll, Satan will take over the United States, will no longer be a Christian nation on a hill, will be in hell. There were others that were just grifters. And corporations are really good at grifting. And grifters are really good at making money. Every other televangelist from the 80s was an atheist. I can tell you that right now. When we look at Ted Haggart, for instance, the ultimate moral crusader of the 1990s especially, ranting constantly about how gay is not okay, drugs are terrible, and then he gets found with an 18-year-old gay cross-dressing hooker and a bunch of meth and crack in a hotel room and has to leave his job. When Peter Popoff has to tearfully apologize. When virtually all of the major names, especially the prosperity gospelers, are debased, and some of these people magically have still managed to salvage a career, they were grifting. They did it for money. Corporations did the same. Here, buy our Jesus Christ cigarettes, the holy smokes that you need in your life. If you don't buy these, you're a sinner. You're less of a Christian. Things were branded that way. Entertainment was branded that way. The moral majority was catered to by people who simply wanted to make money, didn't really want to rock the boat, and they stirred up feelings of patriotism. A false patriotism, by the way, that had nothing to do with the founding goals of America. It was moralistic. It was anti-First Amendment, anti-free expression, is anti-privacy in some cases. Is that not exactly what we see today coming from the other side, so-called? From my perspective, though, it's not a side. It's the same grift. It's the same basic principle. Only the symbolism has changed. There is literally no difference between a corporation in June flying the pride flag to sell more products and yesteryear them putting the American flag or an image of Jesus smiling and looking at the canned beans that they're selling back in 1982. They're the same principle. You've been trained to think that they're different because that, by having an us and a them, an exterior and an interior, by having a blue and a red, a left and a right and so forth, you can cater to people and you can sell them things. It's been about money and maintaining the power structure as is for a very, very long time. This modern methodology of corporate branding, by the way, I hate to tell you, and conspiracy theorists, when they talk about this, are technically true, although they wax hyperbolic, is partially informed by things like Operation Paperclip. All of that initial propaganda, that style of propaganda is requisite really on two things. It's requisite on modern communications, which really they come around at the dawn of the TV era and FM radio and stuff. So we're talking less than 100 years ago, just to be clear. And then, at the same time, a modern understanding of propaganda. A lot of it came from the Nazis. Look up Operation Paperclip. You'll see for yourself. You think that these people were just building rocket engines? No, they were involved with computers. They were involved in communications and engineering at every possible level. Thousands of them. Don't you think that their ideology may have seeped through slightly? There's a reason why corporate propaganda in the early Cold War is so virulent. Dude, there are people who probably smoke cigarettes today because they saw the fucking Flintstones ad from 1961. Or whatever it was. Winston's taste good like a cigarette should. Well, Fred Flintstone told me. I hate to get kind of like going off into spooky woo land, but this is history. This is real. Propaganda has fooled a lot of people's minds. Really, though, there's no difference. It's still just authoritarianism. It's still just totalitarian. It's still censorship. Trying to take care of hate speech sounds an awful lot like trying to drown out this commie subversion a la 1960, now doesn't it? Really, it's exactly the same concept, for exactly the same moneyed purposes, being enforced for the exact same privileged class of extremely wealthy elite people who really run the world through globalism. Globalism being another way of saying imperialism. It's the same exact thing. It's just an expanded oligarchy that traverses normal national borders. It's no longer a nationalistic system. It's a globalistic system. It's the same thing. But now, because people have changed in their overall ideologies, they can't wrap it in the U.S. flag anymore. Because it's no longer about the U.S., it's about the globe. So they wrap it in a flag, they wrap it in an ecological flag and say climate change. They wrap it in the pride flag and say everyone except for a few outgroups that only exist so that we can sell things is one person. Why do you think that they've singled out, for instance, white people specifically to disclude from most of these groups? Because whites as a ratio of the world population is shrinking, as opposed to other groups that happen to be growing. Well, as they advance some of the third world economies, where people tend not to be white, they're going to have to cater a lot of products to them. They're going to have to make a lot of money off that consumerist materialism that supposedly, by the way, is destroying the world, even though they want to move the factories to China instead of actually going green. Biggest farce that's ever been in existence. It's the same authoritarianism. And authoritarianism, by the time I'm old, if I make it to 70 or something, will come back again, and it'll be wrapped in a different flag and waving some other iconography. It'll no longer be wrapped in the pride flag. That'll be passé by that point. It'll no longer be waving the BLM pamphlet. That'll be just like Sharpton 2.0, and an afterthought, a small sort of movement. There'll be some other moral struggle, some other existence of moralism, and some other type of communications technology they're trying to censor at the time. That's it, by the way, that's an explicit prediction. You watch if that doesn't happen in the next 30, 40 years. That's about all. Peace out.